Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Cat's Track. We post an interview with an amazing Canadian each weekday for your daily inspiration. Today, I would like to introduce you to my friend and our next Prime Minister, Erin O'Toole. Erin was born in Montreal, Quebec. He has a son who has just turned 9 this week and his daughter who is 14 months old next month. Rebecca, his amazing partner, has been so supportive through all of this and with their children. So nice. Erin is extremely passionate about making life better for Canadians and working to take Canada back. Politics aside, he also loves history, our veterans, writing, running, and swimming. So awesome, me too. Friends, you'll find his full bio attached. Erin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Catherine.
Thank you. May we start with the topics that we chatted about earlier?
Absolutely, yeah. I have to do one correction. My daughter Molly turns 14 years.
Oh!
I think you said months. We went for a run together this morning. Our biggest thing in COVID is Molly and I have been running together. Some mornings she calls me Sergeant Dad, and it's a little easier to run with a 13-year-old now, not 13-month. But yeah. I'm glad you mentioned them because I'm in politics because of my family and our kids.
Oh, that's so nice. It's so nice to be running together. Gosh, you keep up?
It's a new thing. She's a swimmer and quite competitive, and she doesn't love the dry land, but her running is getting amazing. And we do some crunches and some push-ups, and that's when she started calling me Sergeant Dad. So it's been fun.
That's awesome. Well done. That's awesome. Good. Okay, so the topics, we have 4 of them today. Of course, you know what they are. And one is around the banned conversion therapy.
Absolutely, yeah. Conversion therapy is quite odious and should be banned because it's trying to use pseudoscience to change someone from who they are and their identity. And I've always been against it. It's been talked about off and on in the last number of years. There is a bill that was introduced a few months ago called C8, and it will ban conversion therapy, which I think is good. And so I've been hearing from some people that have some concerns about overbreadth of definitions or things like this, but I think we can get the balance right to send a strong signal that we respect and embrace everyone and who they are and their background, their orientation, their gender, their identity. All of it should be respected and safeguarded, and I've voted that way in the past as an MP as well.
Awesome. So glad to know. Thank you. And what's happening on the pipelines front?
Not enough, although we do see some progress from Trans Mountain, which is reassuring to see the construction there. I guess we should feel pride both as Canadians in getting our resources to market more effectively, and maybe pride as owners because Justin Trudeau bought that pipeline because he bungled the pipeline file so badly with Bill C-69 and the cancellation of Energy East. His unilateral cancellation of Northern Gateway, a pipeline owned 1/3 by Indigenous Canadians, that I thought was an example of great reconciliation, great partnership. So he had really bungled the pipeline file and then doubled or tripled down on Trans Mountain. So I am glad that's proceeding. I've said in my launch of my campaign in Calgary in January that construction of pipelines will be central to my leadership and my government. And introducing a National Strategic Pipelines Act in the first 100 days as Prime Minister will be a way of explaining to Canadians, especially in my province, that Canada's resources are not just the success of Alberta. The hard work and innovation from Albertans go into it, but we all benefit in terms of royalties. So when we're not getting the best world price for a finite resource, that's a national travesty. So the National Strategic Pipelines Act will give cabinet approval to pipelines to tidewater or to refinement capability up front. So the companies will know the approvals there, and then mitigation efforts in terms of the environment, Aboriginal engagement can come afterwards, but the capital certainty for the company will be up front.
Oh, that's excellent. Good to know. And I understand as well that you've been in consultation with our Premier here in Alberta.
Absolutely. In fact, I did launch my campaign in Alberta to speak directly to the thousands of people who were out of work at that time largely due to the anti-energy policies of the federal government. No wonder there's frustration with Confederation when it seems like Ottawa has been holding back the progress of a province that has been a net contributor to national programs, to employment, to royalty, to equalization. So I started that morning with breakfast at the Blackfoot Diner with my friend, Premier Kenny, and I told him about some of my vision. I wasn't sure he would endorse me over the course of the campaign, but he saw my intention to try and address the frustrations, get our country competitive again, get things built, bring back investment to Canada, particularly in energy and resources. And that's part of the reason why he endorsed my candidacy. And we remain in touch even amid the challenges of COVID. I've tried to stay in touch and hear what's happening on the ground in Alberta.
Good. Thank you for doing that. And medically assisted death. Love your opinion about that.
Yeah, well, this is a right that was granted by the Supreme Court of Canada, and I think it's an important right. And this has given a right to people that can access assistance in their death if their death from a condition is reasonably foreseeable or imminent. And there's now a lot of debate on how to qualify that, what is imminent, what is reasonably foreseeable, and also the issue of advance directives. So if someone is diagnosed with an illness that will get to a palliative stage, can they access medical assistance in dying with an advance direction in advance? And I think these are all very reasonable discussions. The one area I've always had concerns when the first debate was held on medical assistance in dying is with respect to mental health. Since I left the military, I've worked on mental health for veterans and first responders for probably the last 15 years, longer than my time as an MP, because I started a charity called the True Patriot Love Foundation for military families and veterans. And of the group of us that started, my passion on the board was mental health, because I saw firsthand in the military when we responded to the crash of Swiss Air Flight 111 in Nova Scotia, how trauma, how that mental strain of service impacted people and injured them, and we didn't have the right treatment options. But if you have the right treatment option, you can recover just as you can with a physical injury. You may have to maintain that healing, that wellness. And so I'm very worried about conditions that are treatable being included in the regime of medical assistance in dying, because I do think with depression, with post-traumatic stress disorder, with a whole range of mental health conditions, people can seem like they want assistance in their death, but really we can get them help. And I think that's my main concern is the inclusion of mental health within the regime. I oppose that. I think it's giving up on people. I'm a mental health advocate as an MP, and so provided we don't open it up too broadly to conditions that are treatable, then I think that right should be respected for Canadians.
I'm so glad you brought this up. I think you may or may not know I'm also very passionate about brain and mental health, and I've recently been introduced to a doctor here in Calgary named Dr. Corey Deacon, and he has a vision of ending mental health issues with brain mapping and therapy that he's confident, and I've seen evidence of it as well, and certainly lots of testimony of people that have had concussions, major trauma, and truly through this therapy, they're able to be productive again, happy again, and it's life-changing for people. So if you ever want an intro, let me know.
I would love that. You know, when I became an MP, I began hosting a mental health event for veterans every year. I co-hosted with Romeo Dallaire, who at that time was a Liberal senator. It wasn't about politics. It was about hearing from a veteran or a first responder about their own personal story back to wellness, because we were hearing so much about the tragedy of suicides that we weren't sending the right signal even in the media that the vast majority of people with a mental injury or mental health condition do get help and are not a miss of our healthcare system, a suicide where we haven't given them the support they need. And what is amazing is we've had physicians from the Royal Ottawa Hospital that have talked about that type of brain mapping so that we can actually see where trauma or where there's a health issue that can be addressed, whether through direct therapeutic treatment, whether through the combination of therapy and a drug treatment. And as long as we equip people to be well, these conditions, as Romeo Dallaire himself shows, you can go on and teach at universities, inspire people around the world from a place a number of years ago after Rwanda where Romeo Dallaire was sleeping on park benches and trying to take his own life. So we have to help people that are in those pits of despair. And I think the more we do with mental health, the more treatment options we have to get people well.
I agree. So one other further question around it. A lot of questions that come back whenever I make this introduction to Dr. Deacon is, there's a fee always, and that's not inclusive for everyone, especially if there's been long history of mental health. They may not have been able to hold down a job properly. Do you have any thoughts on how we could make it more inclusive for everyone?
You know, what's interesting, I was talking to Chief Perry Bellegarde from the Assembly of First Nations just this morning, and one of the issues I was talking about is I'd like to see more federal leadership on mental health, particularly for Indigenous Canadians. It is a constitutional area of jurisdiction for healthcare for the federal government, not the provincial. And I don't think parties of any stripe have done it as well as we need. And I've learned from my own experience working in and around military and veteran health, investment up front on mental resiliency and mental wellness saves the system millions over time, because those people can potentially avoid the trap of addictions.
Yeah.
They can often keep employment, keep their family well. You don't see family breakdown. So the earlier you can intervene. And when I was Veterans Minister, I earmarked national standards for service dogs for people with mental health conditions. We piloted an equine therapy program for therapy alongside equine and horseback riding and things that was pioneered in the US and then brought to Canada through an amazing team in Rocky Mountain House, Alberta.
Oh,
Also not a bad backdrop for an equine program, one of the prettiest corners of Alberta. And I helped bring that pilot program because I said at the time, we've known for hundreds of years how to treat physical injuries from war or from service. We're only in the recent decades getting treatment options for mental health, whether it's the brain mapping, whether it's assistance animals, whether it's peer-based therapy as opposed to a traditional psychiatrist or psychologist training session. In other instances, we've even seen artificial intelligence reliving a moment of trauma and having the intervention from the professional through artificial VR, virtual reality, having them relive that trauma and deconstruct it for healing. We're only the tip of the iceberg for treatment for mental health. So as Prime Minister, this will be an area of focus for me because it has been from the day I hung up my uniform.
Wow, I am delighted to hear that. What about the topic of abortion? Sorry to go sidestepping, but how about abortion?
Very similar to euthanasia. That's a right that was granted to women decades ago. I learned the Morgentaler decision in law school, and that's where I said, I will support the rights for women. It's their choice. It's a pro-choice decision. And that has to be the position of the Conservative Party leader and a commitment not to reopen the debate. And that's been my position. What we have to do as Conservatives is try to respect all views within our movement. And how can we do that, but also work on ways to allow people to feel like they're a social conservative in our party fulfilled, not by going after established rights, but by helping the vulnerable, by working on adoption, by working on child maternal health, like the Muskoka Initiative under Stephen Harper, like religious freedom and conscience protections. There's a range of things that I think we can do to make all members of the conservative movement feel engaged and respected without saying we're getting into public life to take rights away from other Canadians. That's not why I got into public life. I got in to defend and secure those rights and the prosperity of Canadians. And I think that message will resonate.
I think so too. May I ask two more questions?
Sure.
Awesome. So if you would have been Prime Minister back in December of this last year and you saw that COVID was starting to happen, you saw how Taiwan responded and some other countries. If you would have been Prime Minister at that time and or early this year, did you have thoughts of how that could have rolled out, and would you mind sharing that?
Yes. In fact, there's two failures of the Trudeau government with respect to COVID-19. And I've tried to work with them where I can on mask repatriation. I've actually worked with Taiwan to get mask donations for Canada because I have better relations with Taiwan. The minister won't even mention the country's name. And so, you know, where the Liberals are caught on that issue. They were slow on both the health response to COVID and the economic response. I would have closed the border for travel from affected countries in January. Other countries that did that virtually avoided the depth of the first wave of COVID-19. And if you look at the Trudeau government's reluctance until mid-March to close the border, the most affected provinces are all ones that had direct flights from China, Iran, or Italy. And if you almost look in order of which provinces have the most, so Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, you look and see where that community spread started. It was a failure at the border. In fact, when Bill Blair said people were being screened medically at the border and given quarantine instructions, that was proven to be not true. In fact, even Jason Kenney, Premier Kenney, went to Calgary or Edmonton International and checked to see what CBSA officials and CATSA officials were doing. And none of what the Trudeau government was saying was true. So they really botched that and made the provinces have to be the front line for COVID-19 as opposed to our border being the front line. The second thing they did, Catherine, that I think we will really see the results and the pain from in the fall is the economic response was both insufficient and slow and confused. As they were asking the economy to shut down, Justin Trudeau proposed spending $27 billion of new money. He proposed having a wage subsidy of 10%. And for perspective, in the 2008-2009 financial crisis, Stephen Harper had a stimulative $55 billion or so deficit, and the economy was still operating. It was largely a financial services crisis. They needed to triple that within a month and a half, and now we're at $260 billion. They didn't save jobs because they had to have a second bill to get the wage subsidy to 75%. We asked them to refund GST remittances to give some cash flow for businesses. They didn't do that. I don't know a single business in my riding that has received the rent subsidy that Justin Trudeau announced in and amongst his cottage press conferences. They screwed that up too. Most commercial landlords have not given any rent assistance to small businesses. So rather than preserving as many jobs as possible, almost putting them into hibernation and having as few Canadians as possible on the CERB, they put the CERB forward and almost encouraged everyone to go on the emergency response benefit. And the result will be more unemployment than there needed to be had they gotten the programs right. I was saying this, I was calling Morneau, Freeland, Champagne, and trying my best as someone who did restructurings as a lawyer to say, look, if you don't preserve the jobs, you don't preserve the pensions of the company, you don't preserve the supply networks, you don't preserve the economic activity. They really got the response backwards, and I think we're going to pay the price.
I agree. For generations.
Potentially, yes.
Very sad. And that leads me to the question around how the light has been shone on. What many of us knew when my father was passing away, I certainly had front end of this, where senior citizens in residences, oh my gosh. Do you have comments around it?
Yes, and in fact, in early March, when I started talking about the need to get the EI system and other things prepared for COVID, remember I started talking in February about serious plans. And by March, I said we needed to adopt a warlike footing. I said the military would be needed in some acute parts of our health or long-term care systems. The Liberals mocked me for that position. And sure enough, a month later, our weaknesses in our systems provincially were shown, and the military was deployed. The military is still in Quebec.
Wow.
And out of most of the homes, they're out in Ontario now. So we need more capacity within long-term care and seniors residences. And now we know for the next round, we have to put immense resources to the most vulnerable first. What happened, because they're secondary or tertiary healthcare providers, they weren't equipped as quickly as they should have been to prevent the coronavirus from entering their system. And then once it did, they didn't have the protocols, the staff, the PPE to prevent the spread. And in my own area, in Pickering, we had terrible situation with deaths. And then the report from the military showed, just in Ontario and Quebec in particular, how unprepared we were. So where can we have some specific investments for self-reliance and preparedness, where the federal government partners with the provinces as they address these gaps? This is what we have to do to be prepared for a subsequent wave of COVID-19. We need to keep the economy going by social distancing, mask use, sanitation, and good practices, and devote resources to vulnerable areas that we know from the first wave could be very, very vulnerable to the virus, and that is seniors' homes and hospitals. So I think we have to learn. In the military, we used to have something called the after action report. After you were in action, you had to say what went right, what went wrong. And I think nationally, we have to admit what went wrong the worst was our seniors' homes and the lack of response in long-term care.
I agree. It was awful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, Erin. I'm going to work extremely hard. I'm going to get this message out as far and fast as possible. I think you would be a perfect Prime Minister for our amazing country, and I'm delighted that you've been putting your name out there and doing this for our country. I'm very grateful.
Well, listen, I launched my campaign in Alberta, Catherine, because I want to make sure Albertans that are getting frustrated with Trudeau know that our democracy is wonderful. We can replace a Prime Minister that is letting part of the province down and is leading to a national unity crisis. And I think as an Ontario MP that's been an advocate for Alberta and its important place in Confederation, we're having great traction right now, great excitement. Our policy document, Our Country, A Call to Take Back Canada, is being really well received. So thank you for the opportunity for speaking to your network, which I know is deep and well regarded. And thank you for your advocacy for mental health, for small business, and for women in governance and leadership positions and in business. I look forward to working with you as leader and as Prime Minister.
Thank you, Erin. Everybody, that was our next Prime Minister, Mr. Erin O'Toole, and I look forward to him getting in charge very soon. Thanks again for joining for Cat's Track, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next one.